At my daughter's wedding, her brand new husband leaned across the table and told me, in front of everyone, "This house will be mine before the year ends." The words hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. The entire reception hall blurred for a second. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the music, it all faded into silence. Guests were still smiling, oblivious to the storm I felt brewing in my chest. My daughter, radiant in her gown, looked between us, unaware that her perfect day had just turned into a nightmare I couldn't ignore. I forced a smile, masking the shock. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice calm but my mind racing. Philip, her husband, grinned like a predator who knew he'd just unsettled his prey. "You heard me," he said, leaning back, sipping his champagne as if we were discussing the weather. "Your house, it's practically mine." I had known Philip for only a few weeks, yet something in his eyes told me that this wasn't an idle joke. Something darker lingered behind that forced charm. My engineer's mind began calculating, evaluating, analyzing every possible scenario. Was this a bluff, a warning, or the first move of a carefully crafted scheme I couldn't yet see? The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I smiled at well-wishers, gave hugs, pretended to enjoy the dancing, but inside, every second was filled with tension. That one sentence kept echoing in my head. "This house will be mine before the year ends." Later, in the quiet of my study, I revisited our conversations, the small details that now felt ominous. The way he subtly questioned my finances, his interest in my personal affairs, the casual remarks about how easy it would be to help me manage my property. It all suddenly clicked. I wasn't being paranoid. I was realizing a pattern that could ruin not just me, but my daughter as well. I started researching. Philip had impeccable credentials, or at least he appeared to. His LinkedIn profile was flawless, his references glowing, and yet my gut told me something was off. I cross-checked dates, locations, and names. Minor inconsistencies appeared. Nothing overt, nothing anyone else would notice, but to me, it was enough to start digging deeper. That night, I slept uneasily, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this a man who manipulated families for profit? Was he already planning the first steps of an elaborate scam? And most importantly, could I protect my daughter before it was too late? By dawn, I had made a decision. This wasn't just about defending my property. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how dangerous. I began preparing, organizing every document, every conversation, every piece of evidence I could find. I knew Philip would not hesitate to lie, to manipulate, to use charm as a weapon. But I also knew one thing. I had the advantage of suspicion, experience, and a relentless determination to expose him. What started as a perfect wedding day had become the first step in a battle I didn't choose, but one I was determined to win. And I knew, deep down, that the man smiling across from me at my daughter's side was about to learn a very painful lesson. Underestimating me was his first and biggest mistake. The morning after the wedding, the house felt different, smaller somehow, as if Philip's words had already planted themselves into its walls. I wandered through the rooms, pretending normalcy, while my mind replayed every interaction from the night before. Every laugh, every handshake, every casual remark he'd made suddenly seemed loaded with hidden intent. I sat down at my desk, laptop open, coffee steaming beside me, and began my first real investigation. Philip had said he wanted my house. But why? And how could he possibly get it without raising suspicion? My engineer's brain worked in patterns, probabilities, and worst-case scenarios. I had learned over 40 years that threats are often subtle before they become catastrophic.
I started with the basics: social media, public records, and any online footprint Philip might have left. At first, everything looked perfect, too perfect. Pictures with friends, carefully staged vacation shots, glowing testimonials from coworkers. But as I dug deeper, I noticed inconsistencies. A conference he claimed to attend in Chicago overlapped with a trip to New York, confirmed by flight records he had unknowingly tagged on Instagram. The dates didn't match. His LinkedIn profiles listed multiple companies simultaneously, all claiming executive positions. My gut tightened. This man was hiding something, and it wasn't going to be small. I made a mental note: track everything. Every detail matters. I called my insurance company, my bank, even my lawyer, under the guise of routine questions. But each call, each verification, became part of a larger picture I was slowly assembling. Something about Philip didn't just feel opportunistic, it felt systematic. Then I found it, a minor detail that would prove catastrophic if left unchecked. On Facebook, Philip had posted about a successful investment in a property in Denver. Only the house he claimed to have purchased was still listed for sale publicly in my daughter's hometown under my name. He was lying, deliberately constructing a narrative that made him appear trustworthy while setting up a scheme. I felt a chill. If he was willing to fabricate documents for others, what was stopping him from trying with me? I pictured my daughter, blissfully in love, unaware of the storm gathering around her. That realization sparked both fear and resolve. I could not let him manipulate her. Not now, not ever. For the next 2 days, I began building a digital profile. Screenshots, social media archives, flight histories, and public records. Every contradiction became evidence. Every inconsistency told a story. And as I pieced them together, I discovered that Philip had a pattern: quick courtships, immediate obsession with property, and carefully staged documents. Families in Arizona, Colorado, and Illinois had already fallen victim. The scale of his operation was staggering. By the evening of the 3rd day, I had compiled a preliminary report. Philip's operation wasn't just about my house. It was a calculated scheme spanning multiple states, targeting families with one common trait: trust in their children's spouse. And now my daughter, the person I had devoted my life to protecting, was unknowingly his alibi. I knew the risk. I had to act without alerting Philip, but I also had to prepare for confrontation. I began changing passwords, setting up alerts, and reviewing every document I could access. This wasn't just detective work, it was survival. The man I had invited into my daughter's life was a predator, and I needed proof before he realized I was onto him. Night fell, and I sat alone in the study, the soft hum of my laptop filling the silence. I thought about Philip's smug smile, the way he had believed he could intimidate me with a single sentence. "He has no idea what he's walked into," I muttered under my breath. I began drafting a plan, not just to protect my daughter, but to expose him completely. Tomorrow would be the first step: surveillance, documentation, and careful observation. I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Philip had underestimated the wrong man. And underestimation, I had learned, is the first fatal mistake of any criminal.
By the 4th day after the wedding, I was no longer just a concerned father. I had become an investigator, a strategist, someone prepared to expose a predator before he could act. Philip still moved through the house like a king, surveying his domain, completely unaware that I was documenting everything. Every word, every gesture, every subtle smirk was being cataloged in meticulous detail. I started with the obvious: Philip's digital footprint. Social media was a gold mine,
but it was riddled with contradictions. Photos claimed to be from the same events, yet timestamps and geolocation data told different stories. LinkedIn listed multiple executive roles that overlapped in time, and some companies didn't even exist. His carefully crafted persona was cracking under the weight of simple fact-checking. Then I found the pattern: his previous targets. 3 families had already fallen victim to the same playbook: rapid courtship, forged documents, and property acquisition through manipulation. Each victim was devastated, their adult children convinced that Philip's actions were legitimate. Social media posts, court records, and news articles painted the picture of a methodical predator. Eleanor Martinez in Phoenix had lost her home within 2 months of her daughter's wedding. Robert Chen in Denver had suffered a heart attack induced by stress over an illegal property transfer. Philip's reach extended across states, and the cruelty of his methods was consistent. I created a spreadsheet meticulously tracking each victim: dates, locations, documents involved, and the financial impact. Each row told the same story: trust exploited, families fractured, elderly victims pushed to the brink. Philip's signature style became terrifyingly clear. He wasn't opportunistic, he was systematic. By day 5, I began preparing my defenses. I changed banking pins, contacted insurance, and set up fraud alerts. Every precaution felt like a puzzle piece in a game where the stakes were my daughter's future and my home. I also started thinking about the evidence chain. I couldn't just confront him, I had to prove every step he had taken. Then came the discovery that made my blood run cold: a tiny lens, hidden behind a decorative bowl in the living room. Philip had been recording me, cataloging my routines, listening to my calls, watching my every move. It was a violation I couldn't ignore, but it also became a weapon. I carefully removed the micro SD card, each movement deliberate, knowing that this evidence could destroy him. The recordings revealed everything: Philip speaking to his accomplice, Richard Fox, confirming forged documents, notary fraud, and his plan to take control of my house. The arrogance of the man astounded me. He had filmed his own criminal intentions. The meticulous detail in their planning was staggering, and yet his overconfidence had handed me the proof I needed. I backed up every file, organized screenshots of social media inconsistencies, flight logs, and financial transactions. Each piece of evidence confirmed a timeline of premeditation. The man who had leaned across my daughter's wedding table and declared my house would be his underestimated the wrong father. By day 6, I contacted Detective Sarah Miller, the officer Edward had recommended. I explained Philip's patterns, presented the hidden camera footage, and walked her through the compiled evidence. Her reaction confirmed what I already knew. Philip's arrogance had finally created a vulnerability he couldn't recover from. We discussed strategy, surveillance, tactical support, and coordination with the district attorney would be essential. Philip couldn't be allowed to continue his spree. My daughter remained blissfully unaware, still convinced of her husband's charm and honesty. That had to change, but carefully, systematically. I couldn't risk her discovering the plot too early. She was the perfect cover for Philip, and any misstep could put her in danger. That night, I sat in the darkened study, reviewing every file once more. The weight of what I had uncovered pressed down on me, but so did a sense of resolve. Philip had overplayed his hand. He had created a trail of evidence so precise, so damning, that nothing could save him. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was protecting every family he had targeted, and perhaps stopping dozens more from suffering the same fate. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Surveillance, documentation, and planning a confrontation that would catch Philip in the act. But tonight I allowed myself one thought. For the first time since that wedding day, I felt the tide turning, and when it did, There would be no escape.
The morning sunlight barely pierced the curtains when I realized there was no turning back. Today was the day I would set a trap for Philip Green, the man who had threatened my daughter, my home, and countless families across the country. Lillian and Philip were out, leaving me the precious hours I needed to prepare. My house, once a sanctuary, had been transformed into a fortress of observation and evidence. At exactly 8 a.m., 3 unmarked vans pulled up to the driveway. Detective Sarah Miller emerged, calm and commanding, followed by a team of technical specialists lugging equipment cases. Their efficiency made me feel both reassured and nervous. Every camera, every microphone, every hidden device they positioned carried the potential to catch Philip red-handed. It was my own living room, yet it felt like the command center for a high-stakes operation. By noon, the setup was complete. Micro cameras hidden behind picture frames, motion-triggered audio recorders tucked into shelves, directional microphones aimed across rooms, all feeding live to a tablet I carried like a lifeline. Even the air in the house seemed to vibrate with tension. Detective Miller handed me an earpiece, smaller than a hearing aid. "You'll hear us guiding you if necessary," she whispered. "Your safety comes first, always." Then came the rehearsal. 2 hours of scenario drills, role-playing Philip's likely manipulations. I practiced the exact expressions of shock, confusion, and hesitant compliance he expected from a vulnerable father. The goal wasn't to trick him. It was to let him expose his own criminal methodology. "Don't force him," Miller advised. "Let him reveal everything organically. Your role is to be suspicious, but natural." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly, realizing the psychological stakes were just as high as the technical ones. At 5 p.m., I heard the telltale crunch of tires on the driveway gravel. Philip's car. Showtime. My heart raced as I glanced at the tablet displaying every corner of my home. Through the window, I saw him step out of his car with that familiar predatory smile, carrying a manila envelope. Behind him was Richard Fox, the notary, exuding a false sense of authority with a briefcase full of forged documents. The doorbell rang. My hand instinctively rested on the panic button hidden in my pocket. Detective Miller's calm voice came through my earpiece. "All systems live. Stay calm, Preston. This is it." I opened the door, my expression carefully neutral. "Philip, and you brought a friend, Preston." My voice carried the precise mix of politeness and cautious suspicion I had practiced. Philip's confident grin faltered only slightly, an imperceptible twitch in his otherwise smooth facade. They entered, spreading the forged documents across the coffee table. Philip's tone was measured, rehearsed. "Preston, wonderful news. The sale of your property has been completed. Everything's arranged. You're moving to a senior facility, all legally processed." I examined the papers with deliberate care, noting the expert forgeries. "Interesting," I said slowly. "And who exactly purchased my house?" The subtle hesitation in Philip's eyes was a small victory. The trap was working. Richard Fox opened his briefcase, revealing notarization stamps and legal seals. "Everything here is perfectly legitimate," he said, trying to maintain authority. I nodded, playing the role of a confused elder. "Perhaps we should verify this at the police station first," I suggested casually. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Philip froze mid-step, glancing at Richard. "The police?" he whispered, barely concealing panic. I leaned back, letting the calm mask cover my rising satisfaction. "Detective Miller has been tracking your previous operations across multiple states. We have 47 recordings, Mr. Green. Every plan, every forged signature, every manipulation." Philip's confidence crumbled. The forged documents slid off the table as he reached for them, desperation written across his face.
I pressed the panic button, and within seconds, unmarked police vehicles surrounded the house, officers in strategic positions. Through the window, I watched as Philip's predatory poise turned into sheer terror. Detective Miller stepped inside, flanked by uniformed officers. "Philip Green, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse," she announced. Richard Fox raised his hands in surrender, realizing the operation had collapsed. Philip's last act of defiance, trying to shred the forged papers, was stopped immediately. Every piece of evidence he had intended to use against me now worked against him. The tables had turned entirely. I leaned back in my chair, the adrenaline still coursing through me as I watched the culmination of 3 weeks of planning unfold. Philip Green had underestimated me, the father he thought he could manipulate, and now the predator was finally trapped.
8 weeks had passed since Philip Green's arrest, yet the tension in my chest didn't ease as I approached the grand granite steps of the Cook County Courthouse. The spring morning was crisp, the sun warm on my face, but my mind was entirely focused on the final confrontation. Today was the day the predator would face justice, and I would bear witness to the unraveling of his carefully constructed lies. Detective Miller was waiting at the courthouse entrance, her presence a quiet anchor of reassurance. She gave me a nod, her eyes conveying the confidence of a seasoned investigator who had prepared for this moment down to the smallest detail. "Ready for the final chapter, Mr. Weaver?" she asked. I nodded, adjusting the briefcase that contained every piece of evidence, recordings and photographs that had secured Philip's arrest. "More than ready," I replied. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet activity. Media cameras clicked, lawyers whispered, and a small crowd of interested citizens found seats at the back. My gaze immediately sought Philip, and I found him sitting at the defendant's table in a bright orange jumpsuit. Gone was the predatory swagger that had made him so dangerous. In its place was a hollow, haunted stare. Richard Fox had already entered his guilty plea, agreeing to testify against his former partner. But the most important face I looked for was Lillian's. She sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, her composure calm, yet filled with quiet determination. She had filed for divorce within a week of Philip's arrest, reclaiming her maiden name and her dignity. When our eyes met, she gave me a small, knowing smile. The same warmth I remembered from her childhood, the reassurance that this battle wasn't mine alone. Judge Jonathan Clark called the court to order, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to determine the guilt or innocence of Philip Green on charges of interstate fraud, forgery, elder abuse, and criminal conspiracy." The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor's opening statement was methodical, like a well-calibrated machine. He laid out Philip's criminal empire with precision. 12 victims across 5 states, over $2 million in stolen property, systematic targeting of elderly homeowners, forged documents, and corrupt notary practices. The patterns were unmistakable. Philip Green was not a hapless criminal, but a predator who had orchestrated deception for personal profit. Philip's defense attorney tried to spin the narrative, insisting, "Ladies and gentlemen, my client made poor choices, but he was manipulated by others into these unfortunate situations." I almost laughed silently. Even facing decades behind bars, he still refused to take responsibility for his actions. Then came the evidence. Victim after victim took the stand, recounting stories eerily similar to mine. Rapid courtship, housing threats, forged documents, corrupt notarization, and the emotional devastation left in Philip's wake. Eleanor Martinez from Phoenix described losing her home of 40 years, her voice breaking mid-sentence. Robert Chen from Denver recounted the stress-induced heart attack he suffered after being forced out of his family home. The courtroom listened in stunned silence, each story a thread in the web Philip had woven, and now unraveled. Finally, the audio recordings from my own house were played.
Philip's voice, confident and cunning, filled the room. "The old man is completely trusting. By the end of the month, the house will be ours." The jury shifted uncomfortably as the predator's own words damned him. There was no defense against self-incrimination. "Mr. Weaver," the prosecutor called, "please take the stand." My steps were steady as I approached the witness box, the weight of justice pressing down on me. Every victim, every family, and every fraudulent plan Philip had executed across states rested on my testimony. I described March 25th with clarity, the man arriving with forged documents, the threats, the intimidation, and the moment I had activated the panic button that brought law enforcement to my doorstep. Philip's defense attorney attempted cross-examination, trying the old line of family misunderstanding. But I held my ground. Systematic criminals who target elderly victims across multiple states don't create misunderstandings. They create federal cases. A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the courtroom. Even the judge allowed a faint smile to cross his face. After 2 intense days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Judge Clark's sentence was swift and merciless. "Mr. Green, you have systematically targeted vulnerable elderly citizens for financial exploitation. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison with full restitution to all victims." Philip's legs gave out. The man who demanded my house 2 months ago was now broken, facing the consequences of his greed and arrogance. Richard Fox received 5 years, his cooperation noted but not excused. Outside the courthouse, Lillian hugged me tightly. "Dad, I'm so proud of how you protected not just yourself, but all those other families," she said. Detective Miller joined us on the steps, her eyes filled with pride. "Mr. Weaver, this case will be taught in police academies. You've shown that wisdom, not age, is what protects people." As we drove home together, Lillian squeezed my hand. "Dad, what's next for you?" she asked. I smiled, realizing that while this battle was over, my purpose had only grown stronger. "Whatever comes next," I said, "I know I can handle it."
The morning after Philip Green's sentencing, the neighborhood felt impossibly quiet. Birds chirped, the spring sun warmed the sidewalks, and life had returned to what seemed like ordinary calm. But for me, nothing would ever feel ordinary again. I walked through my front door and paused. The house, once threatened by deception and greed, now seemed like a fortress built not of walls, but of knowledge, preparation, and sheer determination. Over the following days, the surveillance equipment that had turned my home into a covert recording studio was carefully removed. Each tiny camera, microphone, and sensor was uninstalled with the same precision it had been installed, leaving my living room, kitchen, and study pristine once more. Yet the memory of those weeks, the planning, the rehearsals, the tension, remained vividly etched in my mind. Every hidden corner had witnessed the unraveling of a criminal empire, and every recording had caught the predator's true face. Lillian visited daily, her presence a comforting reminder that life could heal quickly once justice was served. "Dad," she said one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, "you didn't just protect yourself. You protected dozens of families, people who would have lost everything. How do you feel?" I thought about it for a moment. "Satisfied, yes, but also aware," I replied. Satisfied because justice has been served, a predator is behind bars, and those families can finally breathe. But aware because criminals like Philip exist everywhere, exploiting trust and manipulating goodwill. I've learned that vigilance, planning, and courage are what protect people, and those things aren't taught in school. The local news caught wind of the case, and soon reporters were calling. My story, an elderly engineer outsmarting a cunning criminal, captured the nation's attention. Interviews followed, and I realized that sharing the details wasn't just about fame or recognition. It was about educating others. Elderly homeowners, families, and even professionals needed to understand how subtle manipulation could cost them their homes, savings, and peace of mind. Detective Miller remained a steady presence, offering guidance on speaking engagements and public awareness programs. "Mr. Weaver," she said during one meeting, "you've turned your personal battle into a blueprint for justice. There are agencies that would pay attention to your story. You could prevent dozens more crimes just by speaking out." I nodded, feeling the responsibility settle over me. My life had changed, not because of fear, but because knowledge had turned into power. Even nights were different now. I would sit in my study, reflecting on the past 3 weeks. The fear that once gripped me, the disbelief that someone would dare forge my home's ownership, it had transformed into confidence. I realized that my age, my experience, and even my methodical engineering mindset had been my greatest allies. The world would always have people like Philip Green, but the difference between victim and victor often comes down to preparation, observation, and staying one step ahead. Occasionally, I would receive letters and emails from victims across the country, thanking me for my courage and guidance. Families who had been targeted or feared being targeted found solace knowing that someone had taken a stand. Lillian noticed the effect it had on me. "Dad, you've become more than just our protector. You're a mentor, a guide. People listen to you because you've lived it." Months passed. Philip Green was serving his sentence, Richard Fox was cooperating fully, and life slowly regained a sense of normalcy. Yet the lessons lingered. I started volunteering with local elder advocacy groups, conducting seminars on fraud prevention, and consulting with law enforcement on techniques for spotting manipulative behaviors. Each session, each conversation, each warning to a potential victim was a small victory, a continuation of the battle that had begun at my daughter's wedding. One evening, as I watched the sunset from my front porch, Lillian joined me, her hand brushing mine. "Dad," she said softly, "what would you tell someone like me or anyone to avoid what we went through?" I smiled, thinking of the careful strategies, the rehearsals, the patience, and the courage it had taken. "Trust, but verify. Observe closely. Don't ignore your instincts. And remember, sometimes the most important defense isn't strength, it's planning. The world outside might still be filled with predators, but inside my home, inside my family, and inside my mind, I had won. I had turned fear into action, deception into evidence, and danger into a lesson that could empower others. Justice had been served, but more importantly, wisdom had been gained. And sometimes, that's the most powerful weapon of all.